Welcome everyone to our webinar today with one of the lab's oldest and best colleagues. I shouldn't say oldest colleagues. Since the beginning of the lab, you have been a colleague of ours, not your personal age. Ann Kansfield, who is a pastor, chaplain to the Fire Department of New York, and all around wonderful person. And I'm really excited here today to have her talk with us about her new book, Be the Brave One. And so let me just give the standard reminders before the beginning of the webinar, and then we're going to turn to Ann. So as always, this is being recorded. So if you hear a point that you want to come back to, or you miss something or whatever, don't worry about it. You'll get a link to the recording in the next couple of days. You can go back and watch however many times you like. So don't worry about that. When you get that link in your email, there's a little bitty survey in there. Please fill it out. It takes maybe a minute. It just helps us plan future events. And so we really appreciate that way of giving us a little bit of feedback. I also want to note, because this webinar is specifically about a book, a brand new book, the publisher is offering the lab community a discount. So if you go to the publisher's website, I'll put it in the chat here in a second. You put in the code Kansfield, I'll put that in there as well. You get 50% off right off the bat. So please go do that. Listen to Ann first, but then go do that. So welcome, all of you. Welcome, Ann. I'm so excited to talk about this book. And so, just tell us, how did you end up doing what you were doing, and why did you decide to write this book?
So first off, I like to identify myself as one of the longest standing fans of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. How's that? So I never intended to be a writer. I would admit, though, that I enjoy writing Facebook posts, and not necessarily for like the likes or the shares or whatever, but mostly as a kind of spiritual practice of reflection. I just started sharing stories from my life in ministry, and then what happened with several of my friends, in particular, another fan of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, Laura Everett, said, you should really write a book. People were like, you should write a book. And each time I was like, I do not want to write a book. I like writing little witty reflections about life and ministry. That is not a book. And nor do I feel like I want to write a book, because books take focus and actually like an outline. And, they're not 5 paragraphs of whatever strikes me whenever it strikes me, because it also involves deadlines. So, yeah, but I would say that several folks really were very serious with me about the fact that they had that the stories that I was sharing were having impacts on their lives. That it was really helpful to see what faith lived out could actually look like. Mm-hmm. So my friends really prevailed upon me, in particular my wife, where whenever I complain about the book, she would look at me and be like, "You're not doing it for anything other than God." I'm like, wow, no pressure there, no pressure. But yeah, it's a different vehicle to talk about ministry and aspects of ministry. I'm super excited because I think this is probably the part of the process that I've really looked forward to the most, getting to connect with people and hopefully having more conversations about everyday topics in ministry. Yeah. The book isn't really necessarily aimed at folks who are churchy. If you actually read the book, you might be surprised by some of the earthy themes, let's say, of the book. And thankfully, I worked with a really great editor who helped come up with a framework around values. So I would say the thesis of the book is that if you work hard to name your values and seek to live them out, you live a more fully alive life. And when you live a more fully alive life, you have different experiences with a wide variety of characters who you engage with as you're living your fully alive life.
I think that what you describe as a lack of churchiness is probably what will make this all the more appealing to chaplains. Because if we think about folks who are in positions of spiritual religious leadership, chaplains are sort of the least churchy people in terms of what they are doing and how they are out in the world. So I think there's automatically this overlap there. I know that you have told this story many times. I've heard this story from you, from other people many times, but we have to share it, of course. The blurb of the book says that you decided one day you did not want to be a run-of-the-mill capitalist anymore, and now you are who you are. So tell us about that decision and everything that was just around it at that time in history.
So I went to college at Columbia University, fully anticipating to go to law school or do something like that, and then sort of life intervened. I got really super depressed and didn't take the LSAT, and it was very sad. I could have probably used more chaplaining to be present with me in my sad. And then my mom actually came to me and was like, "Well, Annie, you do have some student loans that are coming due. What are your plans?" And 25% of the graduating class went to work on Wall Street. So I had no idea what was involved with being a stockbroker, but I became a stockbroker. And for a couple of years, I worked at the World Trade Center. I left the job that was at TD Waterhouse at the time, that was in the Trade Center earlier in the late spring, early summer of 2001, and went to work at a different firm. In my mind, hopefully making more money was the plan. In the process, I turned down a job from Morgan Stanley on the 75th or 76th floor. And throughout that summer, I was basically kicking myself that I had turned down this job because my new branch manager was a little more shifty than I felt kind of comfortable with. And so on September 10th, 2001, I actually quit that job and had a job interview lined up at a different branch of the same firm. And I was on the phone with them, just confirming the interview. In retrospect, I cannot remember what time the interview was. It must have been around 10, because I would imagine I'd have been calling right around 8:45 to confirm. The woman on the other end said, "Oh my God, a plane just hit the World Trade Center," and that was how I learned about what had happened. If you want to feel truly useless, be a stockbroker on 9/11, because there wasn't anything that I could do. I walked over to the local hospital to try to give blood. I went and I voted because it was primary day in New York. I mean, but really, there was just it was just such, I've never felt so useless. And a week went by. I had thought about going to seminary, and I called a seminary professor who I knew. My dad worked at a seminary, so it wasn't a foreign place to me, I would say. Just to identify the privilege there of having a good hookup to be like, "Hey, I'm interested in going to seminary." And the professor said, "Well, you're very lucky. We canceled class a week ago. I will pick you up at 4 p.m. and you can make your first class." So that was pretty much my pivot there. I would say that I'm really grateful for that introduction to ministry, because on the hardest days of ministry, I can always point back that I don't want to make any money. I'm not doing this for money. I'm not doing this for prestige. I'm not doing this to feel better about myself and try to prove that I'm worth something in the world, or that I'm special, that I'm, talented or anything. I left all that behind. That was why I was doing the Wall Street thing. And lately within the fire department, we've had some pretty rough weeks. And I've literally said to my colleagues, like, "Hey, you've no idea how important you are. Like, don't go thinking that you should just move to the private sector because this is a rough day. Our rough days really matter, and we really matter to people."
And I think this is affirming of a number of things. First of all, there was no long discernment process. This was not a years-long conversation. This was this sort of constellation of events came together, and here you are. You just called it a pivot, which is it sounds technical, but it's really meaningful. This was not a long, drawn-out process. This thing happened, and boom, here you are. And as you say, I'm not doing this for the money or the prestige. I can imagine our chaplain audience members saying, yeah, if you're looking for money or prestige, you're in the wrong field. But in some ways, I think that an acknowledgement of that, an awareness of that, an embrace of that is sort of, what we might call a lowercase c competency of being a chaplain. If you're here for material gain, prestige, power, you're probably doing this for the wrong reasons. So you go to seminary, and I mentioned at the beginning, you're the pastor of, it's in Greenpoint, correct?
Right. Yes.
Right. So you're a pastor
Greenpoint, Brooklyn.
But you're also chaplain to the fire department of New York. How in the world did that come about?
Well, I would say both are probably reasonably decent stories.
Okay.
Greenpoint, I was in seminary, and I made a deal kind of with God. I figured, being out and gay, I was not going to go and find a church in the RCA. And then one called and they said, hey, we need some pulpit supply. Could you fill in? And I did. And it was so much fun. And they ended up hiring another pastor. And I was heartbroken. So I really wanted to find a church. And the one in Greenpoint, they had been a thriving mega church in the 1900s, and they were down to literally 8 people. And they had the gift of desperation, and I had the gift of desperation. And I thought that they were like such a diamond in the rough, and they thought I was pretty great too. So it was a real gift to get to be the pastor, and it continues to be a gift to be the pastor there. I would say it prepared me really well for chaplaining though, because Greenpoint is a neighborhood that is predominantly Polish, in particular when I started. Most people wouldn't even speak English to you. The expectation was that you spoke Polish.
Wow.
So I've been baptized into a community of people that are not like me at all, which is definitely where I draw some of the themes of the book, I would say, from there. And then the other themes are from the fire department. So about 7 years ago, I applied for an open position in the fire department. I found out about it. I had always wanted to be the fire chaplain. I first discovered that we had chaplains in the FDNY when Michael Judge was killed on 9/11. You couldn't have a better role model than Michael Judge. He pretty much, in my opinion, sets the gold standard for all chaplaining. I have heard from some of his Franciscan brothers, there's a movement to make him a saint. And they say, hero, yes, saint, no. Which I kind of like. I mean, Michael was a really an excellent human in humaning, actually. So I first found out about the job through him and his death. But then it was a posted job on the city website, and a colleague of mine who participated in the Young Clergywomen Project asked a question like, hey, have any of you been fire chaplains? And I was like, huh? There's actually an opening? And I will confess, I felt like a lion about to like roar, like, what are you doing taking my job? And thankfully she was like, I'm not really interested. I was just doing this because my congregant thought I should apply. You'd be great at it. You should do it. So it's a really great story of sort of teamwork and cheering one another on. And since that time, we've collaborated on a couple of moments within the fire department between the church that she serves and the fire department. So yeah, it's been a real gift to be able to figure out this job.
Tell us more about how that worked when you began your work with the FDNY, because you mentioned at the very beginning, you didn't imagine getting a congregation in the RCA for a variety of reasons. And one might think, FDNY, is this the culture? How does that work? Because now that I know you, it makes complete sense. Ann is the FDNY chaplain. Everybody knows that. But before that was true, I don't know that anybody would have expected that. How did that shake out?
Well, and it was an interesting discovery. It's like, oh, this could work really well. In my process of applying, I talked with a retired firefighter who actually like legit just straight up said, like, you're a Protestant. We're 95% Catholic. Who are you to think that you can go and serve us? And that was the moment where and I was kind of like, oh, I don't know. Who am I to think that I can serve you? I don't know. but miraculously out my mouth came, you know what, this isn't a new concept to me. I've been living among people who are not necessarily like me, for more than a decade here. And I kind of like it. I like the diversity. I like the clash of not being able to assume things about different people. So I think that actually really prepared me as I started within the fire department. And then I would also say I got really lucky with a couple of people in the fire department taking me under their wing and kind of showing me the ropes in different ways. A couple of chaplains, but also a couple of firefighters, a couple of EMTs, a couple of civilians. That we really need that, I think, as chaplains. Like, so often we're siloed in this notion of being a chaplain, but really, if you're a hospital chaplain, wherever you serve, you need to know kind of how things run in order to get the lay of the land, right? Like how, and there's a huge ramp up when it comes to figuring out how whatever the system that you're in operates. And for me, I think it was just the right time, because I wasn't making enough mistakes in the parish. Like, I had figured out enough problems that I could have probably coasted. And if you haven't already noticed, I have ADHD. We get bored very easily with things. So I think I could have easily gotten very bored in the parish. And so suddenly, like, the fire department had so many things that I knew. Like, I didn't know the difference between an engine and a truck when I started. I literally had no idea what I was doing. But it was enough that it really kind of kept my focus, and I hope didn't take me too much away from the parish. I actually think the two really work well together, chaplaining and parishing. And I also think that, like, parishing in a context where you are part-time, I had always been part-time at my church, but it sort of filled in the extra time. And now with the fire department, now I truly am part-time there. And it was good. I think it was probably a healthy shift for us together. So yeah, I don't actually know how I managed to go, and, like, it was sink or swim, and I managed to swim in the fire. I mean, I think I'm now swimming. I don't know. We'll see. So it's every day is a new day. But on the whole, I mean, I think I'm figuring it out. It's only taken me 7 years.
Well, and I'm going to say this was entirely unplanned, and didn't know I was going to say this, but what you just talked about, organizational competency and navigation, this is a key skill for any chaplain to have to be effective in their organization. And if you go to the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab website, we have a textbook coming out in May. This is a big chunk of it. How do organizations work? Where is the chaplain within that organization, and how does the chaplain make things happen? I mean, those sound like such kind of dry bureaucratic topics, but from experience, if you don't know how those things work, you're done. You're not going to be effective. No one's going to listen to you. You're not going to know who to talk to, where to be, how to be, when to be. It's just not going to work, especially when you're stepping into an organization that I would imagine has a very strong culture, however you want to define that, like the FDNY. This is everyone knows everybody, and the way things have been done have been like that forever. So for a new person to come in, that's really, I'm sure, intimidating in many ways. I'm glad you mentioned Michael Judge, because I would imagine a lot of chaplains know who Michael Judge is. And if they think about fire department chaplaincy, they at least know they know that name. What does that work look like? I mean, I can imagine a couple of different functions you might have, but what does the work of being a fire chaplain look like? This is such a specific, vivid area.
So I would say the best piece of advice that I got when I started was from a fellow chaplain who said, "You're going to be told a lot of stories about Michael Judge." And I see the question in the comment asking, who was Michael Judge? So Michael Judge
I'll give you the Wikipedia link.
He was a Franciscan friar who lived on 32nd Street, like in the heart of Manhattan, who served as one of the chaplains for the FDNY. He was known throughout the city, and he was a complete, like, character. Everybody I know was like, it feels as though, I should say, everyone I know has a story of interacting with Michael Judge at one time or another. Like, he's here, he's there, he's everywhere, like in New York City. And he was a very beloved chaplain in the fire department. I think in part because he just had a very open and welcoming spirit. And he was a chaplain for, like he interacted with homeless folks on the bread line at St. Francis Parish, which is near Penn Station. And he also ministered to Bill and Hillary Clinton at the White House. So, you know, from the folks with the least amount of power to the folks with the most amount of power, they all thought of him as their guy, you know. So when I started, one of my fellow chaplains said, you're going to hear a lot of stories from folks on the job about Michael Judge. And when you do, listen to those stories, because that's the way Michael is teaching you the job from the other side of the grave. And that advice has been spot on. The people routinely tell me stories about Michael. I think it's actually one of the biggest fringe benefits of the job, because there are always really great stories. And there's stories of showing up for people. There's stories of doing weddings and funerals, of like figuring out how to fix things in the moment, but really of showing up. And I mean, one of my more recent ones that I think I'll always really hold tightly in my heart was, there was a 3-year-old boy who fell into the river last year, and we couldn't find him for several days. And I got called out, and it was probably one of the sadder things I've ever experienced. And it turned out that I had lots of connections with his family. Like, we had gone to the same church. And so I ended up at the visitation and the funeral, where, as I was leaving the funeral home, an older gentleman stopped me and said, "Oh, you must be one of the FDNY chaplains. Of course you would be here." And I was a bit surprised, because often, you know, we don't go to funerals for civilians. And I said, "Well, you know, why would you think that?" And it turned out he was the Lutheran bishop in the early 90s. And and there was an FDNY captain who was severely burned and ultimately passed away from his injuries. But he was in the burn unit for 40 days. And he was Catholic, but his wife was Lutheran. And so this Lutheran bishop said, "Oh, you know, Captain Drennan, I would go and visit him in the burn unit. And every time I went, Michael Judge was there." And so of course he would show up at this boy's funeral. And I just thought that was a beautiful comment, that it's really almost sacramental, like by the work worked, you know. If you show up, you're earning the title, or earning the job itself.
So that relates directly to one of the chapter titles in the book. What is it? 99% of the work is showing up. Showing up is 99% of the job. I almost had it. And a lot of folks will have heard of chaplaincy referred to as the ministry of presence, a ministry of presence. And that it has a little bit of an intuitive meaning. We can understand what that means, but say more about that. Just
now, come on, I mean, part of the, like, when somebody says, "Oh, well, it was the ministry of presence," I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Part of me is like, the ministry of presence is like, I don't know, showing up and being on your phone. Does that count? No, like, if you're really doing it, you're actually showing up as a chaplain. It should be hard work. It isn't fake work. And I mean, I should probably have started earlier, but I might have a bee in my bonnet about, you know, the ministry of presence.
Please release the bee or embrace the bee, whatever the
I don't know what's gotten into me. I mean, 99% is, but you know, there is that 1% where you actually have to show up and be alive. Yeah. Now, what was it you actually asked? Sorry, before I.
Well, what does that what is the hard work of showing up? Because you're right. If you show up to a scene and you're on your phone in the corner, you're not really showing up. Yeah, sure, you're there, but you're not doing anything. So how does one
Right.
how does one be intently, casually present? Like how are you just there with purpose?
Right. Well, first, I would imagine that every chaplain probably has a process of sizing up,
Mm.
which I think is a great term from the fire service. Like you show up and you do a size up. You like what's actually going on here? Who am I around? Where are the needs? And I kind of sometimes think about my size up as like, where's the like water that finds the lowest source? Like we should be drawn to the places of the most pain, the most disenfranchisement, the most disconnected.
Mm.
Where are those places? And I think that part of showing up is like showing up with the right equipment and the right gear. And for us, a lot of it is like our own tending to our own emotional and spiritual selves so that we
Mm.
can be curious, we can be authentic, we can be vulnerable. We can be really ready to actually meet people, you know, where they are in whatever is going on, which is actually really, really, really hard work. I mean, I got called out on the morning after Christmas Eve. I wasn't actually on call, but I ended up getting called out to do a death notification,
Mm.
and I was so discombobulated that I've never experienced this where it wasn't as though I felt like selfish or something, but like I couldn't even find my clerical collar, and it was like had 3 days of sweat on it anyway, but I just wasn't really emotionally ready to be able to I don't know, to empty myself in order to allow, you know, full presence with others. So I think that being present with people in the good times and in the bad really take a lot of actual work on our part.
Yeah. If being present means identifying where is that greatest need in any given situation, and that could be one particular day, one moment, it could be a much longer sort of time frame. But as you approach this work as a chaplain, what does the, the greatest need, the deepest pain typically look like in your work? What kinds of situations are you dealing with where it's like, okay, this is where I have to do the hardest chaplaining right now? What does that look like as a fire chaplain?
It's an interesting situation because I think when a disaster happens, like what happened a week ago in the Bronx, a whole bunch of my friends reached out to me like, hey, we're praying for you, we're thinking of you. In that moment, I think I kind of function a little bit more like a mascot. Like nobody is going to come over to me and bring me their deepest spiritual needs because they can't. They need to wall that off and they need to get the job done. Like the prayer there is like, let me suck it up and do this thing. And then what ends up happening is like a week or 2 weeks or a month or a year down the road, that's when there's going to be a pretty deep spiritual need. And
Right.
I was so, I guess, surprised. Last Sunday, I ended up going and visiting with the dispatchers who dispatched that job. One of the dispatchers, who was the primary person on that big fire, it was his last day on the job. He was retiring.
Yeah.
And his brother was an EMS lieutenant who had died the day after Christmas. And so I had done his brother's funeral. So I figured I would stop by. Honestly, probably because I knew there was going to be some good food and I kind of wanted to hang out with other people. I'm easily motivated by food, probably even more than Jesus, which is probably something I shouldn't admit. But so I showed up and it was so interesting because they didn't want to talk about that job.
Mm.
They wanted to talk about 9/11. And it made kind of perfect sense, you know, that as you bookend a career, that often like the disaster you're in isn't the one that you're actually able to reflect on.
Mm.
It's the one that happened a long time ago. I would say more, it was just a moment of learning for me as a chaplain, because I was open to talking about whatever they wanted to talk about, including the Bills game that was on like the jumbo screen ahead of us. And it was so interesting for them that was so I think sometimes the big needs are not the ones that we think that they are in the moment, that they're almost like kind of flashbacks.
Yeah.
And also that sometimes we don't actually realize when we're being helpful in the moment in which we're being helpful. That sometimes just an encouraging word or glance, or the sense that you're there and available as needed, whether or not somebody takes you up on that, is actually what's needed.
And I can imagine a lot of chaplains finding themselves in a similar situation, whether they sort of take cognizance of it or not. And I'm just imagining, maybe a healthcare chaplain who's working with someone who is, at the end of life or has just received a very serious diagnosis, but they want to talk about that thing that happened 30 years ago, right? When you walk into this situation, you think, there is trauma happening right now. Why don't you want to talk about that? Let me fix that. Let's talk about that. No, it's something else. Which, if anything, just tells us that trauma has no rules and it does what it does, and it's going to manifest in a wide variety of ways. So in some way, not in some ways, in many ways, the fire department is sort of one of your two equal constituencies of the people that you serve, but you also have this parish that you're working at. And when you every time you tell me that when you came, there were 8 members, I think about that great show called Rev that has, I forget what network it aired on. It's a British show, but it's a similar situation, right? Church of England parish that's clearly seen bigger days, and there's this kind of strange cast of characters that are there that are not what anyone expects them to be. I'm imagining a situation, something like that you walked into, where, there's this huge church, this big edifice that at one point was this big social force, and now there are 8 people. How do you pastor 8 people? And I have a sense that is a lot like being a chaplain everywhere else. So what does that work look like? I don't think it's just 8 people anymore, but but maybe I'm wrong.
And the interesting thing is, it's certainly not 8 people anymore, but it is much more like a chaplaining, in that I would look at our church building as being sort of a dynamo that like flips out little bits of light. Like, we're the engine that drives the light. And there are a lot more people who think of our church as their church than I would ever envision as being in the church. So, I mean, the first time I discovered this was, I got quite a talking to from a woman who goes to one of our AA meetings, who was basically like, what do you mean I'm not considered a member of this church? I'm here all the time. And I was like, yeah. So there's a lot of folks who we run a soup kitchen and a food pantry. So people who come for those services or who volunteer with us. And then the worshiping community itself is also, I would say that our worshiping community is relatively transient, which is a little different than a lot of other churches. So Greenpoint has gentrified, and so now not everyone is Polish. Maybe about a third of the neighborhood is Polish, and so we have a lot of younger artists and folks getting situated in New York, who have connected in with the church. So I would say our average age now is probably about 40, but who knows in the pandemic? I mean, I feel like we've all aged. Probably we're now at like 55. Right. Yeah. So, but it is a lot like chaplaining in that for us, I would say the people nothing stays the same. Everything is changing in our church, which is an excellent balance to the fire department, where we do joke that it's 100. The FDNY is now like 155 years old, but like the joke was 150 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. But I mean, people come and stay. I mean, the fire commissioner has been a member of the fire department for 52 years. It is rare that anybody leaves before they get in their 20 years. Most would have 30 or 35. I went to my college reunion a couple of years ago, and somebody was like, "Oh, are you still working for the fire department? And I was like, oh my gosh, what a weird question. Like, of course I'm working, like it's a life situation. Like
I just got here.
I just got here. I'm still the probie. And how dare you even think that I would move on to this is it. I've topped out. There's no other place I can go on the Ivy League career trajectory. But it's an excellent balance, I think, because there aren't a lot of places in New York City, I think, that are full of such longevity, where you have generations and generations of people who have worked for the fire department. It's a lot like churches elsewhere in America. And then I have a church where everything changes within like a week and a half. And nothing is the way that I think it probably should be if I were basing it on the church of my childhood.
Sure.
So I'm constantly forced to try on new things and change in my church. And honestly, like this summer we swore in a new chief, and with it there was like a nice big fire department meal where we all joined together, and I couldn't believe it. Like usually it's a salad with strawberries and goat cheese, and they had some other salad, and I was like freaking out, like, what are we changing? Has everything gone to pot? Where's the strawberry salad? We serve strawberry salad, we serve ziti, we serve chicken parm.
That's that tradition unimpeded by progress.
Right? Who are we without the strawberries?
Well, as you were describing all of these situations, my initial thought is, how could any of this hold together? Because you take these individual parts and they don't naturally fit, right? No one could plan a career trajectory that you have just described, right? No one says, I want to grow up to be a stockbroker, but then not be a stockbroker, but then pastor a church, but then also become a fire chaplain and do all these. Like, no one makes that plan. So I'm wondering what holds this all together. And this is a leading question, because I think the answer is authenticity, because you write about authenticity. And I would imagine that even if some of the chaplains that are with us today have really planned out their careers and they're exactly where they plan to be, there's still those feelings of disjointedness, of dislocation. Do I really belong here? We see it all the time. The lab has a private Facebook group for chaplains, and we see people, really experiencing life in different ways, which is a nice way of saying arguing. There is a right way to be a chaplain, a wrong way to be a chaplain, and how we do it is right and how you do it is wrong, et cetera, et cetera. If authenticity is what is holding all of this together for you, how do you hang on to that as a core principle, especially when you find yourself in really kind of unfamiliar territory? I didn't prepare for this. How does authenticity ground you in a way that allows you to keep doing it in a way that is fulfilling to everybody involved?
Well, so I would say there are times that I struggle with authenticity, especially when I'm insecure. And one of the things that has really helped me attempt to be a little bit more grounded in my own sense of calling in the fire department was on the 15th anniversary of 9/11, there was a big memorial at St. Patrick's, which if you'd like to feel awkward, just be a Protestant out lesbian at the 15th anniversary of 9/11 memorial at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Like, just thinking about it, I'm literally getting the scratchies. I'm so uncomfortable, even like remembering this, right? And all the chaplains had a meeting in advance, and they all decided they were going to wear their ecclesiastical robes, and I had like all hand-me-downs from my dad that were great in Greenpoint. Like, no one cares in Greenpoint. And like, we don't have the cash at my church to buy fancy vestments, because who cares? We're too busy like feeding hungry people and keeping the toilet unclogged. Right. So the my Franciscan colleague looks over at me, and he can see that I'm like kind of kind of anxious about this. And I'm like, really, we can't wear our uniforms? Because let me tell you, taxpayer funded clothing is the best. It's great. I don't have to worry about it. I will, like we'll all look uniform in our uniforms is what I'm thinking. And I'm like, well, I don't really have a suitable stole. And he said, Ann, Michael would want you to have a suitable stole. And he's like, and so he will be purchasing you one. Just let me know. And I guess he has like the Michael Judge Memorial cash that was be available for me to go and buy this new stole. So all summer, I'm freaking out because I want to buy the perfect stole so that I can blend in with all of my male Catholic colleagues, right? Like, I don't want to look like who I am. And so I am like hunting around among my colleagues for photos that might show Michael Judge with the stole that he wore. Because if I could just be exactly like he was, I would be okay. And so this woman who was an EMS captain, she's like, Ann, I don't understand why you haven't gotten it. We hired you because we need you. We already have a bunch of those guys. Do you think you can please be yourself and just stop worrying about what you're going to look like at this service? We need you to be the most you. So I don't know if that really necessarily helps, but I do think that this authenticity about being you, that people can really, it makes a difference. And so I would say that I'm reminded of myself about that like, I don't have to be exactly like the other guys in order. And in fact, like there are a bunch of those guys, they needed a me.
Yeah.
And even though I get sometimes really insecure because I imagine what might be running in other people's heads, that what goes on in other people's minds about me isn't my problem. I need to just be me. And I would say I'm kind of oddly surprised at how well it's allowed me to function, but it seems to be working. And I think that people really appreciate authentic people. Like if you're able to admit what you're good at or what you're not good at, you ask sort of what's the thread that holds all of these ministries together. I mean, to be honest, like I'm interested in a whole bunch of things. I have ADHD. I have no plan. I've never had a plan. I have a friend who's a heavy J on the ENT or whatever the Myers-Briggs thing, super J. Every couple of months we go out for dinner and she's like, well, Ann, where are you going to move next on your next career? And I'm like, I have no plan. I have today and not today. Like there's no plan. And I would suspect that probably there are some chaplains who can have some plans, and that is super great. And I'm kind of in awe, and maybe I can go to a seminar with you so you can teach me how to plan. But like the planning part, I mean, our days are so unroutine. And isn't that great? Like if we wanted to work on a spiritual assembly line, I'm sure we could have found a better job to be on a spiritual assembly line. But instead, no matter what you get, I mean, and it's definitely the case in the fire service, but I would bet it's the same in healthcare chaplaincy and in a lot of other chaplaincy settings. Like you never know what you're going to get, which is actually probably the thesis from Michael Judge's last sermon. The night before 9/11, he celebrated mass at a firehouse up in the Bronx. And he said, the job is a mystery. Every time you get on the rig, you never know where you're going to go. Like you never know what's going to happen. And to be embracing of that mystery is kind of exciting.
I'm imagining, especially if we have some early career chaplains with us today, what you mentioned about trying to fit in that's a completely natural response to a situation, especially where it's a situation where you feel, either you are in the minority in some way or you feel like you're in the minority. Let me just try to be as you all as possible, and I'll, maybe you won't notice that I'm different. Well, that never works. There's nothing more obvious than inauthenticity. But I can imagine early career chaplains thinking, well, I need to fade and not so much into the background that everyone I work with thinks that I'm just like them, right? you go into the hospital room, you go into you're working with college students or whatever, and you don't want any of yourself to come out. You want them to think that you're just you're just like them. That's not chaplaincy. That's not effective. Without that kind of safe grounding in yourself and willingness to be yourself, not always comfort, it can be uncomfortable. I mean, I'm imagining you trying to fit into the crowd at St. Patrick's, and I know, like, it's not going to work. You're not going to blend in. You're not going to
No,
blend
and not long after that, we had a really big line of duty funeral where they line you up in the order of the least important to the greatest of importance, right? Which liturgically, I'm a little messy. I can never remember these things, but after this day, I now remember that it goes from the least to the greatest, because I got to be the first one up, and I was given my literal marching orders. There's like I think a pelican in the beautiful marble floor, and I was told, you go to the pelican, you genuflect, you walk up the steps, you flank to the right, and you go into the last set of seating. I'm like, okay. I repeated it back so I wouldn't forget. I went up, and then as I'm getting into my seat, the self-talk in my brain was of sheer panic, because I quickly realized that my big butch lesbian head was going to be right behind the lectern, where all of the cameras that were going to be like broadcasting this out was going to be. And I was like, oh no, I need to, like, mentally, I'm like, I need to look like I'm paying attention through this entire funeral mass. I can do that. I can be attentive, but I have to, like, I did not want to be where I was. It was like the worst, most uncomfortable spot as I'm envisioning this. And so I then told myself, like, well, you don't know, you can't see the television screens. And so you don't know if you should just hope that maybe they're at an angle and that you don't know what you're talking about, and you're going to be fine. So I call my wife as soon as it was done. She's like, oh, I saw you were right there. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, yeah, I watched it all the way in the subway as I was traveling, and it was so great to get to see your friend. And I was like, oh no, because I think so much of us don't want to be seen.
Right.
I didn't want to be seen. I did think it was a little funny though.
At least you didn't fall asleep. That's the important part.
No, I don't want to be seen fall asleep. Even worse. But I think that it's a tough balance between, narcissism and sort of total, denial and erasure. And either way is tipping into, what I would think of as being sinful. Like, you don't want to hide your light under a barrel, and don't be afraid, if the person tells you you're supposed to go and genuflect the pelican, you do what you're said, and that's it. But don't be afraid of the spots where God has put your feet.
So that's a really great transition to this question that just came in, because we remarked on this enormous transition from the life you were living to the life that you're living now, but this person wants to focus on that transition. I think it's a great question. Can you talk more about the transition from businessy, I'm using their quotes, businessy Wall Street to a more spiritual endeavor? What did you have to let go of, and where did you grow the most? That is a great question. It's anonymous, so thank you, whoever you are. That's a great question.
If I'm really honest, I had to let go of external affirmations and reviews. So often we, from an early age, we get report cards, and you finish up and like you get your first job, you're like, there's no report card here. But on Wall Street, there are still pretty easy report cards. The accounts are either up or down. You're still getting some affirmations for sure. But I didn't have that constant feedback loop. So I had to trust that I had the insight to see where I needed to grow and where I was doing well, which requires a different kind of, I think, seeing and feeling and doing. Sometimes I'm like, really, God, it would be nice if you could just give me a report card. Wouldn't that be awesome? Just tell me if I'm doing a good job. And even within the fire department, we don't have a system of evaluation. Or at least I haven't gotten an official evaluation. But I feel like I'm constantly getting evaluative feedback.
Yeah.
And it's looking for the feedback in the context of like growing emotionally and spiritually as a chaplain. And so learning like what's valuable and what to let go of. I think that was probably the biggest pivot between the business world, because the values of the business world and the values, like spiritual values, are so not congruent with one another.
Yeah. As we close in on the top of the hour here, and there's still a few minutes if someone has another question, I just want to ask the really obvious question. The title of the book is Be the Brave One. Where did that come from, and what does that mean?
So it comes from a conversation I had with a fire chief. And I don't think he thought he was being like brilliant or insightful or anything, which is the best part about the whole thing. He just basically offhand and said like, well, we do things as groups, and like all there needs to do is be one brave one. But the thing is, none of us knows which one it is. We all just follow like as a pack. Like you don't have to be the brave one. You just have to think that there's a brave one in the pack, and everybody else is like pointing fingers at each other. And I thought that was really genius. For this guy who certainly wasn't like, he's no like Yoda, Swami, brilliant, like spiritual seeker. It was just his observation of life.
Well, I suspect that we have more than a few chaplains with us today who are the brave ones, whether they know it or not, or they know how to sort of intuitively identify the brave ones in any given situation. And thank you for your time and for the book. It's all a gift. I forgot to mention at the very beginning that Ann was one of the first, if not the first, chaplain that we profiled in our series. This is what a chaplain looks like. You may have been the very first.
I think I was.
And that was not by accident. When we decided we're going to launch this project, and if we want people to know this is what a chaplain looks like, Ann's got to be front and center. And so, we've only had an hour here to talk and to learn from you. I really encourage folks, go check out that profile. It's a longer profile on the website. Check out the book. Anna's being very modest with her contributions, both in the parish, in the fire department, in the world of chaplaincy more generally. There is a lot to learn from there. So I would encourage folks to go check that out. I really appreciate everyone being with us today, and I appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I do want to answer one quick question, which is, I did not have any units of CPE when I started, and you should be horrified, and I am too. And I am taking them now, and I would recommend. It's been so life-giving for me to go and do CPE at any stage in our career. So I just would like to go and give a shout out to clinical pastoral education at any time in your career. And thank you, Michael, for having me on. I really, really, really appreciate it. This was wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you for being with us, Ann. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks.